Have you ever wondered, what is poetry? What is a poem? Or even, what makes a poem a poem? Welcome to Learn With Me, Mrs. Sullivan. We're going to learn about that today. Well, poetry is a literary genre. Genre is a French word that means an artistic type or style. Other art forms like music and movies are also classified by genre. Here are some examples of literary genres. Literary is things that are written down. The big genres are fiction and nonfiction, but there are several more genres inside each of those genre categories, and you can see some of them here. But poetry isn't fiction or nonfiction. Poetry is a special genre. Poetry is a form of imaginative writing. Poems express thoughts and feelings in a creative way. Poetry is literature. Poetry excites your imagination. The purpose of poetry is to make you think and feel. Poems can be literal or abstract. Let's check out some examples. An example of a literal poem is Weather's Way by Vivian Gould. Whatever the weather, we have it each day. It's hot, or it's cold, or it's sunny, or it's gray. It's blowy, or snowy, or rainy, or clear. There's some kind of weather each day of the year. This poem is literal. It makes perfect sense. It sounds like just a list of facts and information. It is a literal poem. Let's take a look at an abstract poem. Christina Rossetti's White Sheep is an example of an abstract poem. White sheep on a blue hill. When the wind stops, you all stand still. When the wind blows, you walk away slow. White sheep, where do you go? This poem is abstract. It uses a metaphor, we'll talk more about that soon, to talk about clouds. And it talks about the clouds like they're sheep, and the blue hill is actually the sky. So poetry can be literal or abstract. What makes a poem a poem? Poets use carefully chosen words. Poems follow specific structures. The words create rhythm, and poets choose their words because of their sounds. Let's take a closer look at these three things. One thing that makes poetry different from other types of writing is the structure of poems. The words of a poem are arranged in lines, and stanzas or groups of lines are separated by a space. The structure of poems help create rhythm, and we heard the rhythm in this poem. Rhythm is the beat or flow of a poem. Syllables and the nature of certain words create a flow and a rhythm in poems. I'll bet you heard the rhythm of the poem, white sheep on a blue hill. When the wind stops, you all stand still. But something else that made rhythm in that poem is repetition. Repetition creates rhythm. And in this poem, white sheep is repeated often. And even when the wind is exactly repeated. So the repetition also creates rhythm in poems. Perhaps the most noticeable aspect of poetry is that it's meant to be heard. Words are carefully chosen for the way they sound. Poetic sound devices include rhyme, repetition, alliteration, and onomatopoeia. Rhyme is a poetic device where the end of the word makes the same sound. rhymes sound the same at the end, my friend. I like to rhyme all the time. It feels so fine when I rhyme. I wish I had a dime for every time I've made a rhyme. Alliteration is a poetic device where words begin with the same sound. Slippery sleds slowly slide sideways is an example of alliteration. Onomatopoeia is a poetic device where a word names a sound and also sounds like the sound. Well, that sounded confusing. Let's check out some examples. Splash, boom, crash, drip, and pop are examples of onomatopoeia words. Poetry uses figures of speech like metaphor and simile. A metaphor is a special way of describing something by saying it is something else. She has a heart of gold. The metaphor acts like the description is literally true, like her heart is actually made out of gold. But that is not the case. We're simply saying their heart is special or precious, like gold is. And that's a metaphor. We also saw metaphor in the poem White Sheep. Poetry also uses simile. Similes use the words like or as to compare things. For example, sing like a bird, swim like a fish, as cold as ice, as strong as an ox. These are all similes. Poetry is a special genre. Carefully chosen words, attention to structure, rhythm, rhyme, repetition, alliteration, onomatopoeia, metaphor, and simile are all things that you may find in poetry. I hope you liked What is Poetry? Please hit that like button and subscribe. And I hope you enjoyed watching Learn with me, Mrs. Sullivan. Here's some other things you might also enjoy.